Not every story from the ancient world is about grand battles, heroic kings, or shiny golden treasures. Some stories are, well, a bit slower and muddier. This is one of those stories. So just lean back, loosen your shoulders, let your jaw unclench. Maybe even grab a pillow. Because tonight, we're going on a sleepy little trip to ancient Mesopotamia. And we're not going to meet warriors or gods. No, we're meeting brickmakers. Yeah, the people who spent their lives scooping mud every single day. The sun is rising slowly over the Euphrates River. There's no rush. Honestly, this sun has seen it all. It's climbed over these same muddy riverbanks for thousands of years. The air is soft. A little mist still floats above the water. A donkey somewhere is making that classic donkey sound that is way too loud for this hour. Someone yawns. A few early risers shuffle along the narrow dirt path to the river. These are the brickmakers. Not the most glamorous job title in history, but hey, somebody had to build the cities. Kings get the credit, brickmakers get the blisters. The Euphrates doesn't care. It moves slowly like it's still half asleep too. If rivers could talk, this one would probably just say, and keep flowing. This was the lifeline of Mesopotamia. It watered the crops, filled the canals, and most importantly for us, made mud. Delicious, thick, squishy mud, the kind of mud that sticks to everything, your hands, your clothes, your dignity. But to a brickmaker, this was treasure. Not gold, not silver, but mud. Our sleepy little crew begins their day by standing near the riverbank. Nobody's in a hurry. Why would they be? The river's not going anywhere, and neither is the mud. One man picks up a flat wooden shovel, the ancient version of a bucket, and sinks it slowly into the wet earth. It makes that quiet shloop sound as it comes back up, heavy with mud. Another worker just uses his hands because apparently soap was not a priority in ancient times. The mud is warm from yesterday's sun, cool underneath. It's sticky. It oozes between their fingers. It's kind of gross, but kind of satisfying too. The workers talk a little, but not much. There's not a lot to say about mud. One complains about his neighbor's goat. Another mutters about his back. Someone tells a bad joke. It's not a very funny joke, but everyone laughs anyway because they're half asleep and it's too early to care. Birds fly overhead. Somewhere, a child throws a pebble into the water. Ripples spread slowly, like they've got nowhere else to be. You can almost smell the air, a mix of damp earth, water, and the faint scent of smoke from cooking fires in the distance. It's not a fancy smell, but it's honest, real. The kind of smell that sticks to your clothes all day. The mud piles grow as the sun climbs a little higher. The light isn't harsh yet. It's soft and golden. Perfect mud collecting weather, if that's your thing. It's funny when you think about it. We remember the ziggurats, the temples, the palaces, but before any of those fancy buildings could rise up, someone had to get their hands dirty. Literally. Imagine working a job where your big accomplishment for the day is just getting enough mud into a pile. That's it. No monuments, no cheering crowds, just mud. And tomorrow, more mud. And yet without them, nothing else would have existed. Let's pause for a second. Picture the scene like a slow-motion movie. The river, the slow movements, the steady scraping sound of wood against wet earth, the sloshing of water as someone steps too far and almost falls in. A goose honks loudly for no reason. Classic goose behavior. There's no rush, no chaos, just a quiet, sleepy rhythm. If history had a snooze button, this would be it. The Euphrates was famous for a lot of things. Feeding fields, supporting cities, giving life to one of the first civilizations on Earth. But for brickmakers, it was basically a giant muddy buffet. The best mud was down by the lower banks, where the water met the soft silt. It was smooth and perfect for shaping. Not too dry, not too watery, just right. Goldilocks would have loved it. The workers knew exactly where to dig. This wasn't their first rodeo. Well, actually, there were no rodeos, but you get the point. You might be wondering, did they get paid a lot for this? Yeah, no. Brickmaking wasn't exactly a path to fame and fortune. It was tiring, it was repetitive, and most of the time nobody remembered your name. But it was steady work, and in a world where a bad harvest could mean no food, steady was good. Sometimes they got grain, sometimes beer. Sometimes they were just part of a big labor team working for the temple or a rich guy with way too many building projects. What's kind of beautiful, though, is how ordinary it all was. This exact same scene, people standing by the river, scooping mud, probably happened every day for hundreds of years, thousands even. Generations of hands, all doing the same sleepy thing. Somewhere in that mud, the fingerprints of ancient people are still buried. Real people. People who yawned in the morning, stretched their backs, and thought, another mud day. The sun creeps higher, shadows stretch and shrink. A rooster decides it's still morning and yells again. A few workers wipe their faces with the back of their muddy hands, which doesn't help at all. The piles of mud are ready. The real fun will come next. Mixing, stomping, shaping. But that's for later. For now, it's just about collecting. Calm, slow, easy. This quiet start sets the tone for the entire brickmaking process. Nobody here is rushing to build a temple in a day. That's not how Mesopotamia works. Everything here moves like the river. Steady, patient, and just a little bit lazy. And honestly, that's kind of nice. There's something peaceful about knowing that these people live such simple, predictable lives. No emails, no traffic jams, no urgent meetings, just mud, water, and the sun doing its thing. Sure, it was hard work, but it had a rhythm, a calm beat, like the world itself was breathing slowly with them. So as the day begins, the brickmakers keep scooping, their hands sinking into the earth like they've done it 1,000 times before. This is their world. Not flashy, not heroic, just quietly essential. The cities of Mesopotamia would rise tall and proud, but every single wall, every single floor, every towering ziggurat began right here, with mud, with river, with a sleepy little dawn over the Euphrates. And that was only the beginning. Next, we'll step into the sacred mess, where mud meets straw and things get delightfully squishy. But for now, take a breath. Let the sounds of the river sink in. Good old Mesopotamia, home of kings, gods, and a lot of very tired brickmakers. Our group of brickmakers is standing around the mud piles they scooped earlier. Nobody's sprinting, nobody's yelling, everyone's moving in that slow, I guess we're doing this again kind of way. The mud, by the way, is not just any mud. This is prime Mesopotamian silt. If mud had a Michelin star, this would be it. Soft, dense, just the right amount of squish. One man kneels and runs his fingers through the pile. He lifts a handful and lets it drip slowly back down. It plops softly. He nods. Perfect consistency. Another worker leans down, presses it between his palms, and grunts in approval. You know it's serious business when mud gets judged like fine wine. The thing is, not all mud works for brickmaking. If it's too dry, it crumbles. If it's too wet, it falls apart. You need the Goldilocks of mud, just right. And the Mesopotamians knew exactly how to find it. The silt came from thousands of years of river floods. Every year, the Euphrates would overflow a little, leave behind the smooth, fine layer of sediment, then quietly slip back. Over centuries, it built up into this perfect clay-rich soil. The brickmakers didn't need fancy science for this. They didn't need a geologist. They just needed a good pair of hands and patience. Generations of people had already figured out which spots along the river were best. If you were new on the job, you just copied the old guy. Easy. The sun's climbing higher now. It's warm, but not yet burning. A few workers have tied bits of cloth around their heads to keep the sweat out of their eyes. Another guy just lets the sweat drip into the mud because, honestly, it doesn't matter. Someone stretches their back with a long groan. Another person starts humming. Not a song, really, just that lazy, tuneless hum people make when they're trying not to think about how long the day's going to be. The mud is slowly moved to the mixing pits. Wooden shovels scrape against the earth. A couple of workers use big baskets made of woven reeds. They lift, carry, drop. Lift, carry, drop. Over and over. It's not fast work, but that's the thing about brickmaking. Nothing is fast. Everything happens at the pace of mud. There's a strange kind of rhythm to it. Scoop, carry, drop. Scoop, carry, drop. If you've ever done a really boring chore but kind of got into the zone, you know the feeling. After a while, your brain just drifts. One worker might be thinking about dinner. Another is probably regretting every life choice that led to standing ankle-deep in goo at 9 a.m. And honestly, some of them are probably just not thinking at all, which honestly sounds kind of peaceful. The mud pile grows bigger. The silt mixes with little pebbles and broken bits of plant material. But don't worry, it's supposed to look like that. Perfection isn't about cleanliness here. It's about stickiness. One of the older workers leans down and scoops up a chunk. He squishes it between his fingers, presses it flat on his palm, then smacks it down on the ground. If it sticks and holds its shape, it's good. If it splats too wide, too wet. If it cracks, too dry. It's basically ancient quality control. Mesopotamian engineers might have designed temples, but brickmakers were the real mud whisperers. By mid-morning, sweat is glistening on everyone's skin. No fancy work gloves here, just bare hands, bare feet, and a lot of sun. But nobody complains too much. This is the way it's always been done. The river keeps flowing nearby, making that calming shh sound, like it's telling everyone to just relax and accept their muddy destiny. And honestly, they do. Fun fact? Well, fun might be a strong word, but did you know that silt from the Euphrates was so fine that it actually helped give Mesopotamian bricks their legendary durability? The grains were tiny and smooth, which meant the bricks packed together really well. Once they dried in the sun or baked in the kilns, they became solid and lasted for centuries. Some of those bricks are still around today, which is kind of impressive. And also a little sad for the people who made them because, no credit. Now, before the straw and water mixing begins, the mud needs to rest a little. Yes, even the mud gets a break. This lets extra water drain off, and the silt settle into that perfect, workable texture. So what do the brickmakers do during this short pause? Nothing fancy. Some sit on overturned baskets, a few lean against the mud pile. Someone fans their face with a scrap of woven palm leaf. One guy tries to nap in the shade, which honestly is the smartest move in the group. You can almost hear the quiet. Just wind brushing against the river reeds, the steady, lazy gurgle of the water, maybe a fly buzzing around someone's ear. Mesopotamian brickmaking was not a loud business. As the mud rests, someone walks down to the river with a water skin. He fills it slowly, ties it up, and walks back in that unhurried, I've got all day kind of way. There's no rush, because tomorrow they'll do this exact same thing again, and the day after that, and the day after that, and possibly until their grandchildren are old enough to complain about it too. This wasn't just work, it was life. Generations built their homes, their temples, and their entire civilization on this cycle: mud, straw, sun, repeat. Another fun little detail. People in Mesopotamia didn't just make bricks with mud. They also used the same silt to make pots, tablets, and even tiny toys. So somewhere, a child might be playing with a little mud figure while their parents are working knee-deep in the same stuff. Family bonding time, Mesopotamian edition. The older workers like to say they can tell the weather by the feel of the mud. A little too wet? Rain's coming. A little dry? Hot week ahead. They weren't wrong. Centuries of doing the same thing makes you kind of a mud expert. Imagine being so good at something so boring that your predictions beat the local priest. That's power.
Brickmaking didn't have heroes or villains, no plot twists, no dramatic speeches, just slow, steady hands shaping the foundation of everything else. While kings carved their names into monuments, these folks carved their fingerprints into bricks no one would ever admire. And yet, their work literally held the world up. By now, the mud has the perfect, smooth, sticky texture. The resting is done. The mixing pit is ready, and the workers are slowly gathering around. One adjusts their cloth head wrap. Another rolls their shoulders like a sleepy athlete about to do the world's least exciting warm-up. But that's for the next part, because when mud meets straw, things get squishy. For now, the silt has done its job. It's ready, and the workers, tired, muddy, a little sunburnt, are ready too. Okay, we've got mud, we've got silt, but if you really want to make a proper Mesopotamian brick, there's one quiet hero we can't ignore. Water. Yeah, plain old water. No drama, no fireworks, just there minding its business, making everything else possible. Picture the river again, the Euphrates. It's still flowing like it's got nowhere better to be. Slow, wide, and steady. Not the kind of river that crashes and roars, more like the kind of river that gives a long sigh and says, "Yeah, I'll get there eventually." The workers gather by its banks with their baskets, buckets, and tired shoulders. Their sandals are already wet. Some just gave up on sandals a long time ago. Why bother? The river always wins.
Water wasn't just important in the brick-making process, it was everything. No water, no mud. No mud, no bricks. No bricks, no walls. No walls, no cities. And no cities, well, no Mesopotamia. And honestly, that would have been awkward for the entire history of civilization. The river doesn't rush, it doesn't brag. It doesn't care if it's building an empire or just making some puddles. It's just there. And the brickmakers treat it with quiet respect. Some of them murmur a small thank you before they dip their buckets in. Nothing fancy, just a tiny ritual. When your entire life depends on a river behaving itself, it's smart to stay on its good side. The way water works with mud is actually kind of beautiful, in a slow, messy, earthy way. The water softens the silt. It slips between every tiny grain, making the whole mix smooth and easy to shape. But you have to get the balance right. Too much water and the mud becomes soup. Too little and it cracks like an old bread crust. The workers have done this so many times they don't even measure. They just know. A few splashes here, a few scoops there, swirl it around with bare feet, done. One worker, let's call him Nabu because every ancient civilization needs at least one Nabu, steps into the edge of the river. He dips a shallow bowl into the water and lifts it slowly. The surface glimmers in the morning light. He tilts the bowl and lets the water flow into the mixing pit like someone gently pouring tea. Another worker hums softly. The sound blends with the lazy splash of water hitting mud. This isn't work that needs shouting. Nobody's barking orders. They've all done this since they were kids. Their fathers did it, their grandfathers did it, and probably their grandfathers too. Brickmaking is less of a job and more of a family curse. A very muddy, slightly damp curse. You'd think something so essential would come with fanfare. Trumpets, speeches, royal decrees. Nope, just water, flowing, quiet, patient. It's not dramatic, but that's the magic of it. Civilizations aren't built on big explosions. They're built on tiny, repetitive, boring things that work really, really well. Water doesn't argue. It doesn't take sides. It just keeps flowing, turning dry dirt into something builders can stack on top of each other. In fact, most of ancient Mesopotamian cities were carefully placed near rivers not just for farming, but for brickmaking. You don't want to drag thousands of bricks uphill. Nobody's got the energy for that. The closer you are to the river, the less walking you have to do. And if you've ever carried buckets of mud under the Mesopotamian sun, you'll understand why location really matters. There's this funny thing that happens during brickmaking. As the mud mixes with water, it starts to make this low, squishy sound, almost like the earth is sighing or burping. One of the workers laughs every time it happens, like he hasn't heard the exact same noise every day for 20 years. Even in the dullest jobs, little moments like that keep people sane. The Euphrates is also where they cleaned up, sort of. Not very well, but close enough. After a long day of mud stomping, workers would wade in, splash the mud off their arms and legs, and maybe joke about who was dirtiest. No bubble baths, no scented soaps, just a big river that didn't judge anyone. Another thing people often forget is how carefully the Mesopotamians managed their water. This wasn't some wild, untamed flow. They built irrigation canals, slow, winding waterways that carried just enough water to the right places. Think of them like ancient plumbing, but slower and muddier. Brickmakers used these canals to make sure they always had enough water close to the pits. It saved them from hauling it bucket by bucket all day. You can imagine how grateful their backs were. Around noon, the river gets brighter and hotter. The surface reflects the sun like a big shiny mirror. Some workers squint and wipe their faces with their forearms, leaving muddy streaks across their cheeks. Honestly, at this point, everyone's just part of the mud ecosystem. A few kids, because there are always kids hanging around rivers, are splashing nearby. They're laughing, throwing bits of wet clay at each other. One of them slips and lands in the water with a loud splash. Everyone chuckles. Life here isn't glamorous, but it's simple. Water gives, mud sticks, bricks build. The cycle goes on. It's also kind of poetic when you think about it. The same water that softens the mud for bricks is the same water people drink, cook with, and pray over. It's the same water that grows the crops that feed them. And someday, long after these particular workers are gone, the same river will still be flowing, whispering against its banks like nothing ever happened. The brickmakers know when the water's just right. They can tell by the way it runs over their hands, by the sound it makes in the pit. They don't need rulers or charts, just experience. Generations of quiet skill passed down without anyone writing a manual. No one's clapping for them, there's no award for best water pourer of the year, but without this step, no ziggurat would stand, no wall would last. The entire city would quite literally fall apart. As the afternoon edges closer, the air starts to feel heavier. The mud pits are glistening, smooth, and ready. The water has done its part, silently, efficiently, without asking for thanks. The workers step back, letting the mix settle. One leans on his shovel, another stretches their legs in the shallow water, sighing like a person who's been doing this way too long. Someone hums again, the same lazy tune from earlier. The river doesn't care. It just keeps moving. Always there, always part of the process. All right, we got the mud. We got the silt. We got the water. Now comes the part where things get, let's just say, very hands-on. Or rather, hands-feet on. Welcome to the sacred mixing pit, the place where mud meets straw and dignity goes to die. The pit isn't glamorous. It's basically a shallow hole in the ground, wide enough for a few workers to stand in. Over time, it's lined with a thin crust of dried clay from countless days of mixing. The edges are rough, the floor is soft and wet, and the smell, well, it's very natural. There's no perfume called Eau de Ancient Brick Pit, and honestly, there's a good reason for that. The workers gather around slowly, some already barefoot. The smart ones ditched their sandals before the day started. The newer guys usually keep them on and then lose them in the mud 5 minutes later. Someone pokes at the pit with a stick. Another worker takes a deep breath, like a man about to step into cold water. Except this water is brown, sticky, and squishy. Then, without a dramatic speech or any ceremony at all, one man steps in. The first step is always the same. A soft, wet schlop. Then another foot. Schlop. Then the slow, sinking feeling as the mud oozes between his toes, wrapping around his ankles like a clingy cat. It's warm from the sun, soft, a little too soft. Somewhere nearby, someone lets out a quiet laugh. Yeah, it never stops being weird.
Soon, 2 more workers join him, then a 4th. They line up inside the pit, spread out so they don't step on each other, and begin their daily muddy dance. And no, it's not elegant. This isn't ballet. This is ancient Mesopotamian foot stomping, also known as, "I can't believe I'm doing this again." Step, press, turn. Step, press, turn. The sound is almost rhythmic, a thick, sloshy beat as their feet push and twist the mud, mixing the water evenly into the silt. Little bubbles rise to the surface with faint bloop sounds. Someone chuckles at every one. It's not fast work. The goal isn't to race. It's to get the mixture smooth, balanced, and just sticky enough to shape into bricks later. But it's not just mud and water in there. Now comes the secret ingredient: straw. One worker drags over a bundle, long, dry stalks left over from last season's barley harvest. It's golden in the sunlight, crinkling softly when he lifts it. He tosses a few armfuls into the pit. Immediately, the clean, warm straw disappears into the brown goo like a heroic sacrifice. The straw has a job. It keeps the bricks from cracking when they dry. It gives them strength, holds everything together, kind of like ancient rebar, but, way more biodegradable. The workers stomp again. Schlop, schlop, schlop. Straw wraps around their ankles. Some sticks to their legs. Someone mutters something under his breath, probably a very old Mesopotamian curse word that basically means, "Why is this my life?" The pit smells like wet earth and crushed plants. The sun's climbing higher now, making the air thick and heavy. Sweat beads on foreheads. A few flies hover around, because of course they do. But nobody rushes. They've done this so many times that their bodies just know the steps. This is their version of a morning exercise routine, except there's no cheering, no upbeat music, and definitely no gym towels. The straw slowly breaks apart as they keep stomping. Little bits spread evenly through the mud. When the workers lift their feet, they leave behind deep, smooth impressions that slowly fill in again. There's a quiet beauty to it. Not loud, not grand, but simple, steady, human. One of the older workers, maybe a guy who's been stomping this same pit since he was a teenager, hums softly, a lazy little tune. The others don't join in, but they also don't need to. The mud, the straw, the steady squelch of feet, it's already music in its own slow, sticky way. Sometimes a worker slips a little. It's hard not to when your floor is made of wet earth. When that happens, everyone laughs. A few good-natured insults are thrown around. Nobody gets offended. It's part of the rhythm. There's no clock ticking here, no boss yelling at them to hurry. Just the sun, the pit, and the endless dance. When people imagine ancient civilizations, they usually think of priests chanting, kings making speeches, or armies marching. They rarely think of a bunch of tired people ankle-deep in mud, quietly stomping like lazy grapes. But honestly, this is the real foundation of those fancy temples. This pit right here, this muddy foot orchestra. The sun keeps climbing. A breeze drifts across the river, carrying the smell of wet earth and straw. A couple of workers take a break on the edge of the pit, dangling their muddy feet over the side. Someone flicks a piece of straw at someone else. They laugh. There's no rush. The mud isn't going anywhere,
The straw definitely isn't going anywhere. This is their pace. Slow, repetitive, weirdly calming. When the mud reaches the perfect texture, the stomping slows. Then it stops. One by one, the workers step out of the pit, their legs covered in thick brown paste up to the knees. They scrape it off on the edge with sticks or just use their hands. No spot treatment here, but hey, free mud mask. Someone washes off in the canal. Someone else just shrugs and lets it dry. It's not like anyone here is trying to impress a fashion magazine. The mixing pit is ready. The mud is ready. What started as ordinary dirt and water is now something new, something strong, something that can become part of a wall, a temple, a city. It's still boring, sure, but it's the kind of boring that holds civilizations together. As the workers rest for a moment, the pit sits silently behind them. Steam rises slowly from the wet surface in the warm air. It doesn't look like much, just a hole full of brown stuff. But in the story of ancient Mesopotamia, this pit is a quiet legend. Because from this simple mixture, everything else will be built. So, we've got the mud ready. It's smooth, squishy, and just a little too warm. But hold on, our Mesopotamian friends aren't done yet. You see, mud alone might feel nice between your toes, but it doesn't exactly make a strong brick. If you just mold it as it is, it'll dry too fast, it'll crack, it'll crumble, and then, one random day, your wall will collapse right when you're trying to eat dinner. That's why the next step is so crucial. It's all about straw, chaff, and finding that perfect, boring balance. Picture a big pile of straw sitting in the sun. Golden, dusty, and dry. This isn't the fancy stuff. Nobody's braiding this into hats or using it for decorations. It's the leftover stalks from last season's barley or wheat harvest. The edible part was already ground into flour months ago. What's left behind? A mountain of scratchy, dry stalks. Basically the meh part of the crop. But for brickmakers, this stuff is treasure. Nearby, there's also chaff, the flaky husks that were separated from the grains. Chaff is lighter, almost feathery. It's not good for much except, well, you know, making your nose itch. But here in the land of bricks and sun, even this dusty reject has a job. The workers scoop the straw and chaff with wide baskets. The older guys have done this so many times they don't even look down. They toss the bundles into the mud pit with the smooth skill of someone who's spent a lifetime doing it. And honestly, they probably have. The sound of straw hitting the wet mud is oddly satisfying. Whoosh, splat. A little like dropping dry spaghetti into boiling water, except, smellier. One guy leans on his basket and squints at the pile like a baker judging dough. He knows the right amount just by looking at it. It's not a science here. It's pure, ancient brickmaking instinct. And then, once again, the stomping begins. Our trusty mud pit, still warmed from the sun, now has long golden stalks and dusty chaff floating on top. The workers step in with a sigh, as if their feet didn't already have enough mud therapy for one day. Schlop, schlop, schlop.
Straw wraps around their toes. Bits of chaff stick to their shins. Someone sneezes because chaff is rude like that. The key is balance. Too little straw, and the bricks will be weak. Too much straw, and they won't hold shape. Think of it like making pancakes. Add too much flour, and it's a brick. Add too much milk, and it's a puddle. Somewhere in between, magic happens. Or, well, good enough to build a wall happens.
The stomping is slower this time. This isn't just about mixing mud. It's about letting the straw weave through the mixture like threads in a fabric. The workers lift their feet and push down again, twisting slightly. They want the straw everywhere, in every clump and every scoop. Every now and then, someone pauses to pull out a stubborn straw bundle that refuses to break apart. They tear it with their hands and toss it back in. No shortcuts here. Bad mixing means bad bricks, and bad bricks means someone has to rebuild the wall of their house at the worst possible time, like during dinner. And nobody likes rebuilding a wall during dinner. The sun's climbing higher now. The mixing pit smells like wet earth and dry hay. It's not terrible, honestly. Just earthy, natural, a little sweaty. The workers are quiet, except for the steady rhythm of their feet and the occasional sneeze. You can tell they've done this hundreds of times. There's no drama, no excitement, just pure, reliable dullness. But this dullness is kind of beautiful. Because in its quiet way, it's building a city. Now, here's the secret sauce of Mesopotamian brickmaking: soaking time. Once the straw and chaff are evenly mixed, the mud isn't used right away. Oh no, that would be too easy. Instead, it's left to sit for a while, sometimes for hours, sometimes overnight. Why? Because when straw soaks, it softens. It bonds with the mud better. It creates a strong, flexible texture that won't break when it dries in the sun. In modern terms, it's like letting your dough rest, but instead of bread, you get bricks. The workers step out of the pit, their feet covered in a lovely shade of muddy brown. They scrape off the worst of it on the edge and wash the rest in the irrigation canal. No spa day, just practical. Meanwhile, the mud sits and sits and sits. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the straw soaking. This waiting period is when things slow down even more. Some workers lean against baskets. Some sit in the shade, sipping water from clay jars. A couple of them might even take a nap right there, heads resting on their folded arms, because brickmaking isn't exactly thrilling. And honestly, if you're listening to this in bed, this is the part where your eyelids probably start to feel heavy too. After a good soak, the mud is ready for one final check. One of the older workers walks up, scoops a chunk into his hand, and squeezes it. If it holds its shape like a lazy lump of cookie dough, it's perfect. If it crumbles or drips, something's off. This man has no diploma, no clipboard, no thermometer, but his hands are his tools. They've been brick testing since before he had his first beard hair. He nods. A solid nod. This mud is officially brick-worthy. The straw and chaff are now blended so well you can barely see them. They're hidden inside the mixture, waiting to give the future bricks their strength. This step, quiet and unremarkable, is what decides whether the walls of a house will stand for decades or melt back into mud during the first rain. A whole civilization relies on people quietly mixing straw into dirt. It's, weirdly poetic. The workers stretch, wipe their foreheads, and look toward the wooden mold stacked nearby. The next step is the most satisfying one: shaping the bricks. But before that, let's take a moment to appreciate the straw, the humble stalks that everyone ignored after harvest. They aren't glorious, they aren't carved into temple walls, but they've held up countless cities. All right, the mud is perfect. The straw has soaked, the chaff is mixed in like some kind of ancient secret ingredient, and now it's showtime. Well, not really showtime. This isn't some dramatic theater. Nobody's clapping. But for our Mesopotamian brickmakers, this is the most satisfying part of the job. This is where mud becomes a brick. The heroes of this chapter? Art people.
They're wooden molds. Picture a simple rectangular frame made of wood. No fancy carvings, no handles, just a plain, boxy shape. The shape of the bricks that will build temples, homes, canals, and probably a few goat sheds. These molds are like ancient cookie cutters, except instead of making cute little stars or hearts, they make slightly lopsided rectangles. Mesopotamians didn't mess around with aesthetics. They wanted bricks, lots of bricks. The molds are laid out on the ground beside the pit. Some are single brick molds, others are doubles or even triples. They keep them in a nice little line because even though this job is repetitive, they know the importance of order. And honestly, they probably just don't want to trip over them. Beside the molds is a pile of fine, dry sand. That's the secret trick. The molds are dusted with sand before the mud goes in. This stops the mixture from sticking. No ancient non-stick pans here, just good old sand. A worker grabs a handful, sprinkles it inside the frame, and spreads it around with his palm. The sand feels worn from the sun, a little grainy, a little itchy, but it works like magic. Then the real work starts. One man steps into the pit with a basket. He scoops up a heavy, wet lump of mud. It looks like someone overfilled the bowl of chocolate pudding, except this one smells like wet straw and regret. He hauls it over to the mold and drops it in with a satisfying plop. Another worker kneels down and spreads the mud evenly, pushing it into every corner of the wooden frame. His hands are completely covered now. Fingertips, palms, wrists. There's no point trying to stay clean. The trick is no air pockets. If you trap air inside, the brick can crack later. So the worker pushes, presses, and smooths until the mold is filled evenly. The top is scraped flat with a piece of wood. It's not perfect, no brick ever is, but it just needs to hold. Then, with a careful lift, the mold is pulled up and away. What's left behind is a brick, a soft, wet, muddy rectangle lying on the ground, glistening in the sun like the world's least exciting cake. One brick down, only a few hundred more to go, maybe 1,000. Brickmaking is not a quick hobby. There's something kind of sweet about the way they work together. One person scoops, one spreads. Another sands the mold and gets it ready for the next one. No one rushes, no one yells. They've done this so many times that their movements have a rhythm. Not fast, but steady. It's like an old, sleepy song that never really ends. The ground around the worksite starts to fill with rows of soft bricks, each one almost identical, but not quite. Some are a little taller, some have straw poking out the sides. A few look like someone sneezed mid-scoop. But that's okay. These aren't for a palace ballroom floor. These are bricks for walls that need to stand up, not look pretty.
The sun climbs higher. The mud warms up. Flies hover lazily above the wet surface, like tiny, annoying foremen. Someone swats at them with the back of their muddy hand. Someone else doesn't even bother anymore. The workers fall into their rhythm. Scoop, drop, press, smooth, lift. Scoop, drop, press, smooth, lift. It's the ancient version of factory work, except the machines are tired people with muddy elbows. But here's the thing. This boring repetition builds entire cities. Every temple, every ziggurat, every clay tablet archive. All of it begins right here with a bunch of people making the same rectangle over and over again. If you were to zoom out and look at a city like or Uruk in its prime, you'd see walls stretching for miles, and behind every wall, probably some guy who spent his entire morning scooping mud into wooden boxes. Not exactly glorious, but crucial. The sand and the mold starts to stick to their fingers. The mud cakes around their wrists. Some of the workers hum softly, maybe to pass the time, maybe just because that's what you do when there's nothing else to listen to except mud hitting wood. They talk a little, quiet,
Lazy chatter about the river level, about barley harvest, about some goat that escaped last night. It's not exciting, but it's real. And in some way, it's comforting. This is the rhythm of ordinary people holding up the bones of civilization. Every now and then, someone messes up. Maybe the mold shifts too early and the bricks slump sideways like a tired pillow. Maybe the mud wasn't packed tight enough. When that happens, they just shrug, scoop it back into the pit, and start again. No panic, no drama. Just another slow, sticky do-over. As the afternoon drifts by, the rows of bricks grow longer. The worksite looks like a muddy little field of rectangles. Soon, they'll have to dry these bricks under the hot Mesopotamian sun. That's another slow process, and yes, it's just as thrilling as it sounds. The workers step back for a moment, wiping their faces with the backs of their muddy hands. Someone laughs at something small. Someone yawns. They know they'll be back tomorrow, and the next day, and probably the next week, because cities don't build themselves, and mud never stops needing to be shaped. What's kind of poetic, in a dull, dusty way, is how these bricks are like quiet little time travelers. Some of them will crumble after a few years. Others will last centuries. A few might even get dug up thousands of years later by archaeologists holding toothbrushes. And those archaeologists will say something like, "Fascinating, a fine example of early urban architecture." Meanwhile, the brickmaker who made it probably just wanted to go home and nap in the shade. The molds keep moving. The mud keeps dropping. The sun keeps baking everything in sight. There's no twist here, no secret shortcut, just the slow, steady shaping of the future, one rectangle at a time. And you know, maybe that's what makes it kind of special. Because while the kings got their statues and the priests got their hymns, the brickmakers got something quieter. They got to hold the world together with their hands, even if it meant being covered in mud all day. We've scooped the mud, we've stomped the straw, we've molded the rectangles. Now we wait. This next part isn't dramatic. In fact, it might be the least exciting part of all. Welcome to the ancient Mesopotamian art of drying bricks, a process so slow, so uneventful, it could make a snail look impatient. But boring doesn't mean unimportant. This step decides whether those bricks become solid walls or sad, crumbly piles of mud. The work site at midday is quiet. Rows and rows of soft, wet bricks lie on the flat, sun-baked earth. Each one looks exactly like the next. Brownish, smooth on top, with little bits of straw peeking out here and there, like tiny, annoying foremen. They're warm from the sun, but still soft. If you step on one right now, it'll squish. And yes, someone probably did that at some point in history, and yes, they probably got yelled at. Before the drying begins, the workers do a little brick check. They walk slowly between the rows, squinting at the surface, poking a corner here and there. If the mud's too wet, they leave it. If it's starting to firm up, they gently lift and turn the bricks on their sides. This is called flipping, and it's surprisingly important. Bricks that stay flat on the ground too long might stick, warp, or crack underneath. A quick flip helps them dry evenly, kind of like flipping pancakes, except these pancakes weigh several pounds and could build a wall. The sun in Mesopotamia doesn't play around. It bakes the land hard and dry. The air shimmers slightly above the dusty plain. Even the flies seem slower in this heat, like they've accepted their boring fate. The workers wear simple cloth wraps to keep the sweat out of their eyes. Some tie cloth around their heads. A few just let the sun do its thing. They've done this 1,000 times before, and they know brick drying is a waiting game. Here's the thing. No fire is involved here. Unlike the fancy kilns that would come later in history, these early bricks are sun-dried. They don't need wood or charcoal, just time, air, and a lot of patience.
It's cheaper, it's easier, and it takes forever. You could almost imagine someone sitting on an upturned basket nearby, staring at the rows of bricks like they might suddenly decide to drive faster if stared at hard enough. Spoiler, they don't. As the sun climbs higher, the top layer of mud begins to change. It loses its shine. It gets a dull, dusty finish. If you press it with your finger, it doesn't leave a big dent anymore, but a soft one. The straw peeks out a little more clearly now. The air smells warm, not smoky, not dirty, just baked earth, a smell older than cities. The workers don't actually stand around for hours doing nothing. They've got other things to keep busy with, fetching water, preparing new mud, checking older batches of bricks. But every so often, someone walks through the drying rows again. One guy crouches down, knocks lightly on a half-dried brick. It makes a dull funk sound. That's a good sign. The outside is hardening. The inside is still moist, but it's holding shape. If the brick made a squish sound instead, well, back to waiting. At this point, the worksite looks a little like a very boring bakery. Instead of bread loaves cooling on racks, we've got mud rectangles baking slowly on the open ground. Rows and rows of future walls. Some bricks are just an hour old. Others are from the day before. The color darkens slightly as they dry. The newer ones still shine in the sun. The older ones look dull, dusty, and just a bit lighter. It's not exciting to look at, but it's satisfying. Like watching progress very, very slowly. A gentle breeze picks up, carrying the earthy smell across the fields. That breeze helps the bricks dry evenly. Too much wind, though, and they'll crack. Too little, and they'll stay wet for too long. This is why experienced brickmakers watch the weather closely. A cloudy day could delay everything. A sudden rain could ruin hundreds of bricks, and nobody wants to start this whole muddy process again. So yeah, Mesopotamian brickmakers were basically amateur weather forecasters too.
You can imagine them sitting in the shade, drinking from clay jars, muttering things like, "Looks like good drying weather today," while a lizard scurries across the ground, utterly uninterested in human problems. Later in the afternoon, when the sun isn't quite as harsh, they come back for another flip. This helps the underside dry out. By now, the bricks have firmed up enough to be moved carefully without losing their shape. They're still fragile, though. A careless kick or drop could turn hours of work into a very disappointing pile of mud. They line them up neatly again, spacing them so the air flows around them. It's like an ancient version of quality control. And even though they probably never used that word, they definitely practiced it. In some places, they stack the half-dried bricks loosely, creating little drying towers that let the air circulate between them. It looks like a lumpy wall that forgot what it wanted to be, but it works. This stage can take several days. The bricks aren't considered ready until they're hard all the way through, not just outside. That's the difference between a strong wall and a sad, soggy mess. The sky begins to soften as the day drifts toward evening. The sun's light turns golden, brushing across the drying bricks. The workers look tired, their feet caked with dried mud, their clothes dusty. But they don't complain much. This is their normal. And honestly, there's something peaceful about it. No loud tools, no smoke, just earth, air, sun, and time. When the last inspection of the day is done, the workers head home. The bricks stay behind, lying in neat rows under the open sky, slowly hardening as the night breeze cools the air. Some of them will dry overnight and be stacked in the morning. Some will need another full day. But nobody rushes the sun. The sun doesn't care about schedules. As the stars come out, soft, scattered lights over the flat land, the drying field goes quiet.
Only the whisper of the wind moves between the rows. The mud is turning to brick in the simplest, oldest way imaginable. No magic, no big invention, just time, lots of it. By morning, the bricks will be firm. In a few days, they'll be ready to stack, ship, and build with. These are the bones of Mesopotamia, baked by the sun, shaped by tired hands, held together by straw and patience. A temple might rise, a house might stand, a wall might hold back a flood, but for now, they just lie there, quiet, drying. The sun has done its job. The once wet, squishy bricks have turned firm and solid. They're no longer mud with ambition. They're actual building material. Now comes the next phase in our boring but essential adventure, moving and stacking. You'd think this part would be simple. Pick up brick, put down brick, repeat. But oh no, this is Mesopotamia. Even stacking mud requires patience, skill, and a strong back. The drying yard stretches out under the early morning sun. The ground is cool, and the bricks, lined in long, tidy rows, look like a small army waiting for orders. Workers step carefully between them, because at this stage, even though the bricks are dry on the outside, they're still vulnerable. Drop one too hard, and it might chip, crack, or worse, crumble into a very expensive puddle of dirt. One bad step, and boom, goodbye brick, hello sad worker. The first thing the workers do is test. They tap a few bricks with their knuckles. A solid brick gives off a satisfying funk. A weak one sounds soft and dull. Those weaklings are set aside to dry more or to be remade later. They don't waste the good ones by stacking them too soon. Because here's the thing, if you pile up damp bricks, they trap moisture and get soft again. And soft bricks are basically fancy-shaped mud pies. Once the approved bricks are chosen, the hauling begins. No forklifts here, no wheelbarrows, just bare hands, simple slings, and sometimes flat wooden trays. A few workers carry bricks one by one, balanced carefully on their shoulders or hips. Others use woven baskets to carry a small stack at a time. There's a rhythm to it. Pick up, step, step, place down. Pick up, step, step, place down. Slow, steady, almost like a sleepy dance. The storage area isn't far. It's usually a flat, shaded patch of land, sometimes near a wall or a big tree if they're lucky. The reason? Shade helps keep the bricks from baking unevenly or getting too brittle. You don't want your hard-earned bricks turning into dust just because the sun got a little too excited. The workers move in quiet lines. There's not much talking, maybe a soft grunt here and there. Someone hums, someone else yawns. After all, this isn't thrilling work. It's work that requires care, not speed. When they finally set the bricks down, they don't just throw them in a pile like a bunch of potatoes. Nope. Mesopotamian brickmakers stack with strategy. They lay the first layer side by side with a tiny bit of space between each brick. That gap lets the air move through the stack. Then they place the next layer on top, but slightly offset, so no brick is directly on top of the one below it. Think of it like building with giant, slightly fragile Lego bricks. This crisscross stacking pattern makes the pile stable. It also helps the bricks keep drying slowly from all sides. No trapped moisture, no collapsing towers, no heartbreak. If you stand back and look at it, the stack starts to look like a strange, lumpy staircase, uneven, but strong. Built not for beauty, but for practicality. Each layer is placed gently, like setting down sleeping cats. One wrong move and the whole tower could lean or wobble. That's why the experienced brick stackers are kind of like quiet brick whisperers. While the strong workers carry the bricks, others keep the stacks tidy. They crouch down, adjust crooked bricks, brush away bits of loose mud, and make sure the piles don't tilt. Nobody wants to be the guy who knocked over 200 drying bricks.
This is why stacking duty often goes to the more experienced hands, not because it's glamorous, but because if you mess up, everyone notices. As the sun climbs higher, the storage area starts to fill up. Pile after pile grows slowly like sleepy little towers across the yard. Each stack is spaced apart, leaving narrow walkways between them. That makes it easier to grab bricks later without playing some ancient, dusty version of Tetris. Here's a fun little fact. In some parts of Mesopotamia, they used wooden planks or mats of reeds between layers if they wanted the stacks to last longer. It helped with airflow and kept moisture from building up at the bottom. Smart people, these ancient brick nerds. Not fast builders, but clever ones. The workers don't rush. They know what happens when you hurry with fragile things. A cracked brick doesn't build a good wall. So they stack slow, carefully, one after another, over and over. By mid-morning, sweat runs down their backs. Their hands are dusty. Their shoulders ache. But the neat stacks growing taller around them give a quiet sense of progress. No one's going to sing songs about this job. No poets are going to write odes to the glorious stacker of bricks. But this dull, back-aching step is what makes everything else possible.
It just made it a little muddier. When the skies finally cleared, the sun returned to finish what it started. The mats were lifted off, carefully shaken, and set aside to dry. A few unlucky bricks were scooped up and recycled. Most survived, a little damp, but still standing. Life went on, slowly, quietly, as it always did. It's funny, isn't it? Ancient Mesopotamian cities were built with mud and patience. And yet, something as simple as a rainy day could shake the whole process. But they adapted. They always adapted. Because if there's one thing a brickmaker learns early, it's that the weather doesn't care about your schedule. And so, the rain came and went, the bricks waited, the workers waited, and the city, slowly, stubbornly, kept growing. For chapters now, we've watched humble bricks being born, mud scooped, stomped, shaped, dried, stacked, and even rescued from the rain. But now, the moment of truth. The bricks finally get to do what they were made for. They get to become a wall. And let me warn you in advance, it's not a dramatic moment. There's no drum roll, no choir, just a group of tired bricklayers stacking rectangles on top of each other very, very slowly. The building site is already prepared. The ground is packed hard, leveled carefully by workers using flat boards and their own weight. No fancy measuring tools, just rope, stakes, and a sharp eye. Someone marks the foundation lines with chalky dust or thin ropes. The shape of the wall is born not in stone, but in dirt lines. It might be a house, it might be a temple, or maybe just another section of a city wall. Either way, it starts here, quietly. The first layer of bricks is the most important. If that row is crooked, everything above it will slowly tilt like a sleepy camel. So the workers take their time. They set each brick down gently, pressing it into a thin layer of wet mud. Yes, mud again. That muddy paste isn't just for shaping bricks. It's also the glue that holds them together. Think of it as ancient Mesopotamian cement, only squishier. One worker pats the top of a brick with the flat of his hand, making sure it sits snugly. Another checks the alignment with a simple string stretched tight across the row. They don't have laser levels, but they've got good instincts and a lot of practice. Once the base layer is set, the second row begins. And here's where the magic, or, well, the method happens. Each brick is placed so it overlaps the ones below. This pattern is called staggering, and it's been used for thousands of years. Why? Because if you stack bricks directly on top of each other, the wall would be weak. But when the seams are offset, the weight spreads more evenly. Even ancient builders knew, if you want a wall to last, don't stack it like a Jenga tower. They scoop a bit of wet mud on top of each brick, then gently place the next one over it. A worker uses their palm to press it down with a satisfying little squish. The excess mud oozes out from the sides and gets smoothed over with a flat piece of wood. It's not fancy, but it works, and it's kind of satisfying to watch. Around the wall, the site buzzes softly, not with machines, but with people moving in a quiet rhythm. Someone brings fresh mud in baskets, someone else carries more bricks from the stacks. A few workers stand on simple wooden planks laid across piles of dirt, building the wall higher, inch by inch. No shouting, no chaos, just slow, steady work. A wall rising like a lazy loaf of bread in the sun. As the wall grows taller, the workers add supports. Not for decoration, this is all about not collapsing. They lean wooden beams or poles against the wall, sometimes tying ropes to keep everything stable. Sun-dried bricks are strong, but they still need a little help while the mud between them sets. It's like putting up a wobbly cake and adding skewers to keep it upright. Not glamorous, very practical. Some larger projects, like temples or palace walls, also had layers of reed mats built between rows of bricks. That might sound strange, but it actually helped distribute weight and made the wall more flexible. Think of it as ancient reinforcement, the world's first rebar, made of plants. You can imagine a group of builders pausing, leaning on their shovels, and admiring their slowly growing wall. It's not tall yet, but it's something. A straight line where there was once just dust. As the day goes on, the wall rises. Not in a single burst of construction glory, but brick by brick, mud smear by mud smear. The sun beats down, turning the fresh mortar into something firmer. The bricks settle into their new life as part of something bigger. A wall. A barrier. A piece of a city. In homes, the walls would usually be one brick thick, but for city walls or temples, they often made them double-layered, two parallel brick walls with a space in between, which they filled with more mud or rubble. This made them thicker and sturdier. Also, heavier. A lot heavier. You did not want to be the guy assigned to carry those extra bricks all day. While some worked, others probably muttered things like, "This wall better not fall down in the next rain." Or, "Why couldn't we build something light for once?" But still, they kept going. Because walls meant homes. Walls meant safety. Walls meant cities. When the wall reached the planned height, they smoothed the outer surface with a fresh layer of fine mud. Not for strength, just for looks. A smooth wall is easier to maintain, and it looks nice too. Sometimes they even pressed reed patterns into the surface or carved little symbols. A touch of ancient style. Before leaving for the day, the builders inspected their work. They tapped a few bricks, adjusted a few seams, checked that the wall was standing straight. Then they left it alone to dry. Because just like the bricks themselves, the wall needed time to set. Overnight, the breeze moved softly across it. The mud hardened a little. The bricks settled into their new life as part of something bigger. A wall. A barrier. A piece of a city. No one cheered when the wall reached its final height. No one made a speech. Just quiet nods, maybe a tired smile. And then on to the next stretch of wall tomorrow. That's how ancient Mesopotamian cities grew. Not with sudden bursts of glory, but with 1,000 small, dull, careful moments like this. Brick by brick. Wall by wall. Sleepy, but steady. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear it. the soft thud of a brick set down, the rustle of mud being smoothed, the low voices of builders at work, the quiet rise of something lasting. The wall is up, the bricks are proud, the builders are tired. You'd think that's the end of the story, but no. Walls, like everything else made of mud, have a way of, well, aging. Slowly, quietly, sometimes inconveniently. This is the secret life of ancient walls. Cracks, sagging corners, and the ongoing battle against rain, wind, and time.
At first, the wall stands strong. The sun dries the mortar, the structure settles into the ground like a sleepy cat, finding its favorite spot. But Mesopotamian sun-dried bricks, as impressive as they were, had one little problem. They weren't immortal. They could chip, they could soften, they could crack. And if you've ever built something with dried mud, you know. Cracks have a way of showing up exactly when you don't want them to. It starts small. A little hairline crack near the base. Maybe the ground shifted a bit, maybe some water dripped there overnight. Nobody panics. But the builders notice. They always notice. If you spend months making bricks, you develop a sixth sense for their bad habits. Ancient Mesopotamian builders had a simple maintenance ritual. Every so often, especially after the rainy season, they'd walk along the walls, tapping, poking, and squinting at every suspicious line. Tap, poke, squint. Over and over. And when they spotted a crack, they didn't just shrug and walk away. They got to work. The simplest repair involved more mud. They'd mix a fresh batch, same as before, clay and straw, just stickier. This patch mud acted like ancient wall putty. One worker would clean out the crack, picking out loose bits of dried mud. Another would press the new mix inside with their hands, smoothing it flat with a short wooden board. Then they'd let the sun take care of the rest. In a few hours, the wall was as good as new. Well, almost. For bigger cracks, like when an entire corner started to crumble, they needed more than a quick smear. They'd remove the damaged bricks carefully, one by one, then they'd rebuild that section like a tiny wall of its own, fitting in new sun-dried bricks and fresh mortar. This wasn't a glamorous job. It was slow, messy, and usually done under the hot sun, but it kept the city standing. In a way, Mesopotamian walls were like living things. They grew, aged, and needed care. Ignore them long enough, and they'd start to sag, lean, or fall apart. Take care of them regularly, and they could last for decades. Some structures, like temples or city gates, got special attention. Those walls were thick, double-layered, and reinforced with reed mats. When a crack appeared there, it meant more work, and probably more people grumbling quietly about having to fix it. The repairs usually happened early in the morning when the sun wasn't yet punishing. Workers would bring baskets of mud and fresh bricks, climb wooden scaffolding, and start patching. The rhythm was slow. Scoop, smear, press, smooth, repeat. Water damage was the real enemy. A surprise rainstorm, or worse, a flood, could eat away at the base of a wall in just a few days. Once the bottom softened, the top had no choice but to follow. To prevent that, builders often lined the lower sections of walls with baked bricks or stone if they could afford it. These materials resisted water better, but not every wall got the luxury treatment. Most had to rely on regular inspections and lots of patching. Think of it like skincare. If you keep it moisturized, or in this case, unmoist, you'll look good for longer. If you don't, well, cracks happen. Inside homes, wall maintenance was part of daily life. Families often kept a little pile of leftover mud near their door. If a crack showed up inside, someone just smeared some fresh mud over it and smoothed it out with their hands. No contractors, no fancy tools, just hands and mud. Some people even decorated their repairs, pressing small patterns into the damp patch to make it blend in.
Nothing says home sweet home like a nicely patched mud wall. But cracks weren't the only problem. There was erosion too, especially at the tops of walls. Wind slowly shaved away at the edges. Over time, a sharp corner could turn into a soft, uneven lump. To fix that, workers climbed up, shaved away the loose bits, and rebuilt the top layer with fresh mud. Sometimes they added reed caps to help shield the wall from water and wind. Every season brought a new round of repairs. After the dry season, they'd fix the cracks caused by shrinking mud. After the rainy season, they'd patch the places that had turned soft. The city didn't stop for this work. It happened quietly in the background, like sweeping floors or fetching water. Just another part of keeping things upright. You can imagine the sounds. The slap of wet mud against dry walls, the soft scrape of wooden boards smoothing it flat, the occasional grunt of someone stretching their sore back. It wasn't exciting, but it was strangely steady. A wall with good care lasted. A wall ignored did not. For bigger public buildings, the repairs became small community efforts. Groups of workers, sometimes whole families, pitched in to keep temples, storage houses, and gates in shape. There wasn't really a construction company in the modern sense. It was just people patching mud. And honestly, it worked. As evening fell, the freshly repaired walls glowed softly in the low light, the new mud patches slightly darker than the old. It gave the city an oddly patchwork look. But to the people of Mesopotamia, that wasn't ugly. That was normal. A wall with patches meant a wall that had lived through seasons, rains, winds, and years. In this slow, quiet cycle of cracking and repairing, Mesopotamian cities didn't just grow, they endured. Not with unbreakable stone, but with care. The walls weren't perfect. They didn't need to be. They just needed to be tended to. Again and again. And if you walk through those ancient ruins today, some of those walls, or their bones, are still there. Because someone, thousands of years ago, got up early, mixed some mud, and patched a crack. By now, the wall is standing tall. The bricks are dry, the cracks are patched, and the builders are probably sitting somewhere nearby, quietly judging how straight the edges are. But a wall wasn't just something you built and forgot about. Oh no. A wall was a canvas. Ancient Mesopotamians had a knack for turning plain mud into something worth looking at, even if it meant a few extra hours under the hot sun. Let's start with plastering, because honestly, everything begins with plaster. The raw bricks, even when they were perfect little rectangles, didn't exactly scream elegant. They were rough, bumpy, and full of tiny holes where straw stuck out like bad hair. So, before they painted anything, people would slap on a layer of plaster made of fine clay or gypsum. Plastering a wall wasn't fancy work. It was basically mud wrangling. One worker would toss handfuls of wet plaster against the wall, another would smooth it out with a flat wooden board, moving slowly, like buttering a very large and very uneven piece of bread. Sometimes, the plaster dripped down the wall in sad little streams. When that happened, someone just scooped it back up and tried again. Waste not. Once the wall was smooth, it was ready to shine. Well, not literally, but it was ready for decoration. The simplest decoration was just a fresh layer of clean white plaster. Many ordinary homes stopped right there. A smooth, pale surface made rooms brighter, reflected sunlight, and looked, well, less like a pile of mud. But some walls got special treatment.
Here's where paint enters the picture. Yes, Mesopotamians painted their walls. And no, they didn't have hardware stores with neat color palettes. They made their own paints from natural pigments. White came from gypsum. Red came from iron-rich clay. Black came from carbon or soot. Yellow and brown came from ochre. To make the paint, They ground these pigments into powder, mix them with water, sometimes with a bit of sticky sap or egg white, and turn them into a thick, creamy paste. Imagine someone dipping a bundle of reeds into a clay bowl, then brushing it over the wall in careful, slow strokes. They didn't paint wild landscapes or complicated portraits. Their style was more symbolic. Geometric shapes, zigzags, straight lines, simple patterns that look clean and repetitive, almost hypnotic if you stared long enough. It wasn't just about looking nice. Patterns on a wall said something. They hinted at the status of the building, sometimes even at the function. A temple might have carefully painted motifs and symbolic lines. A home might have a few neat stripes or whitewashed walls. A storage room? Probably just plaster and some good intentions. And here's the thing. Paint didn't last forever. Sun, wind, and rain wore it down, so walls got repainted again and again over the years. Layers of plaster and paint built up like pages of a storybook. If you were to peel back the paint on an ancient wall, you'd find traces of old colors hidden underneath, like time quietly piling up. But Mesopotamians didn't stop at paint. Oh no. Some walls got reliefs, shallow carvings or pressed patterns made while the plaster was still wet. Workers would use wooden stamps or simple tools to press triangles, circles, or little rosettes into the surface. It gave the wall texture, a kind of low-key elegance that caught the light when the sun came in at the right angle. For important buildings, they sometimes embedded bits of baked bricks or colored stones into the plaster. A wall might have a border of red bricks around the door or a pattern running along the bottom edge. Nothing too loud, just enough to make it feel like someone cared. You might think this was all just decoration. But in Mesopotamia, decorating walls had a bit of ritual tied to it too. Before plastering or painting, especially in temples or large homes, people sometimes made small offerings, a pinch of grain, a splash of beer, a whispered blessing to whatever god or spirit was supposed to keep the wall standing. It wasn't just construction, it was care. Inside homes, painting was often a family affair. One person mixed the pigment, another smoothed the plaster. Someone else carefully painted the edges near the ceiling, probably while standing on a wobbly stool that definitely had seen better days. Children sometimes got to help with the lower parts of the wall, which meant, of course, that a few ancient homes had crooked stripes near the floor. The past, it turns out, had toddlers too. As the paint dried, the house slowly transformed. What once looked like a pile of mud now felt like a proper home, cool inside, bright walls, smooth surfaces. You can almost imagine the quiet satisfaction of a Mesopotamian family sitting on woven mats, looking at their freshly painted walls and thinking, yeah, not bad. Public buildings took things a step further. Temples often had patterned bands of white and red plaster. Palaces, for the lucky few who lived in them, might have decorative reliefs of animals, gods, or geometric shapes arranged like a repeating story. No electric lights, no big art galleries, just soft flickering lamps casting shadows on decorated walls, making the patterns dance a little. And here's a fun detail. Decorated walls weren't just for the living. Tombs and burial chambers were sometimes plastered and painted too. People believed that walls should look good even in the afterlife. Because apparently nobody wanted to spend eternity staring at ugly bricks. Over time, decoration became a marker of wealth and care. A well-painted house said, "This family's doing all right." A peeling wall meant someone hadn't had the time or maybe the resources to fix it. So people paid attention. A dull wall got noticed. A bright, freshly plastered one got compliments. Some things, it seems, never change.
The process of maintaining painted walls was almost meditative. Every few years, they'd scrape off the loose bits of old plaster, smooth a new layer, repaint the patterns, and start the cycle again. This slow rhythm gave Mesopotamian cities their distinctive look: earthy tones, soft edges, and walls that carried stories written not in words, but in color and texture. So, as the sun sets over the city, the walls glow faintly: warm red, soft white, a gentle play of shadows. Nothing flashy, nothing loud, just quiet, lived-in beauty. A wall wasn't just something to hold up a roof, it was something to take pride in. We've spent a lot of time zoomed in, squinting at mud, plaster, cracks, and zigzag wall patterns. But now, let's step back. Way back. Imagine you're standing on a low hill just outside the city. The sun is dipping toward the horizon, and the air smells like wet earth and reed smoke. From here, you can see it all. A city made almost entirely of bricks. And it's not exactly dazzling, but it's beautiful in its own quiet way. First, let's talk about color. Forget the bright blue rooftops or shiny marble you might imagine in other ancient cities. Mesopotamian cities were earth tones: soft browns, gentle reds, dusty yellows, and creamy whites. Everything blended into the landscape, like the city had just grown out of the ground itself. Walls plastered with pale clay caught the last rays of the sun, glowing faintly gold. Roofs made of packed mud lay flat, stacked like steps as buildings nestled together in uneven rows. The effect wasn't loud or dramatic. It was warm, like a sunset you could live inside. The layout of the city felt less like a master plan and more like someone kept adding bricks wherever they found space. Narrow alleys twisted between houses. Some streets were barely wide enough for two people to pass each other without awkwardly sidestepping. But this was normal. Cities grew slowly, one brick at a time. One family expanded their house here, another built a wall there, and before long, you had a living maze. Urban planning in ancient Mesopotamia was less blueprint and more, let's see what happens. In the center of the city rose the larger structures: temples, storage houses, administrative buildings. These weren't just taller, they were bolder. Thick walls, plastered smooth, decorated with clean lines or zigzag bands. Some even used baked bricks near the base to resist floods and give the walls a cleaner look. And then there was the ziggurat, the great stepped platform rising above everything else. Made of thousands upon thousands of sun-dried bricks reinforced with baked ones, it looked a bit like a giant wedding cake that had decided to be serious. The ziggurat wasn't just a building, it was a statement. It said, "We can stack mud very, very well." Around the ziggurat and temples, the houses clustered in tight blocks. Most homes were one story. Some had a second floor, a real luxury, built with the same humble bricks.
Roofs were flat, so people used them like extra rooms. You could spot families up there in the evening, sitting on mats, chatting, or just cooling off after a hot day. From a distance, it looked like a quiet, layered puzzle of rectangles and shadows. The streets themselves were dusty in the dry season, muddy in the wet one. You'd see little gutters cut into the edges, meant to carry away rainwater, although "meant to" is doing a lot of work here. After heavy rain, most streets turned into slow-moving puddles. Still, the people were used to it. They walked carefully, lifting their long robes just enough to keep the mud off. Children splashed through anyway, because children are the same in every century. If you keep stepping back in your mind, the shape of the city begins to make sense. The outer wall, thick and carefully maintained, encircled everything like a tired but sturdy hug. It wasn't smooth or perfect, but it stood. Watchtowers poked up at intervals, and big gates broke the wall here and there, letting travelers and traders come in with their donkeys and carts. Just outside those walls were fields, neat, square plots watered by narrow irrigation channels that sparkled faintly in the fading light. The fields fed the city. The city built the walls. The walls protected the fields. A quiet, unflashy circle of life. The smell of the city carried on the wind. It wasn't exactly fragrant, let's be honest. You'd catch a mix of baking bread, wet clay, animals, reed smoke, and the occasional waft of less poetic smells. But to the people who lived there, it was home. And the sounds, those were soft too. Muffled chatter from doorways, the distant bleat of goats settling down, a pot clinking against a hearth, someone laughing, someone singing quietly to a sleepy child. This city wasn't a city that roared. It hummed. A low, steady hum, the kind that wrapped around you like a blanket. If you stood there long enough, you might notice something funny. Everything matched. The walls, the streets, the ziggurat, the houses. They were all made from the same material. Clay and mud shaped and stacked. The city didn't need to shout to prove its greatness. It whispered it in every wall. When the lamps and torches were lit at night, the glow was warm and flickering. No bright spotlights, no neon signs. Just soft little points of light scattered through the alleys. It made the city feel calm, almost sleepy. Perfect, honestly, for dozing off if you happened to be lying on a rooftop under the stars. The ziggurat stood out the most at night. People believed it was a staircase for the gods, a way for the divine to visit the earth. But from a distance, it just looked steady and quiet, like the city's big brick guardian, watching over everything. And in a way, it was. The thing about Mesopotamian cities is, they weren't trying to be timeless wonders. They were just trying to work. And because people took care of those bricks, patched them, plastered them, repainted them, the cities stood for centuries. Not in shining marble, not in bronze, in good old mud. If you could walk closer now, you'd see doorways with low lintels, tiny courtyards with pottery jars stacked against the walls, bits of reed hanging from roofs, and people moving slowly through the alleys. Nothing grand, but everything lived in. It's kind of funny. We often imagine ancient cities as glittering palaces or wild adventures, but really, for most people, it was this. Dust, mud, brick, warm evenings, the quiet creak of a wall cooling down after a hot day. Not exactly thrilling, but deeply human. So here, standing on this little hill, looking at the soft light bouncing off plastered walls and listening to a sleepy city hum, you begin to see the charm. A city of bricks doesn't need to dazzle you. It just is. Steady, honest, a little dusty, and maybe, just maybe, a bit cozy. Every wall has a story. Some stories are long and proud. Others end quietly, with a soft crumble and a sigh of dust. In Mesopotamia, bricks built homes, temples, ziggurats, and entire cities. But over time, sometimes centuries, sometimes just a few seasons, walls began to give up. Not with a dramatic collapse or an explosion. No. Mud brick walls had the decency to fall apart slowly. At first, it's barely noticeable. A corner softens, a bit of plaster peels away like dry skin, a few bricks at the base begin to sink slightly into the ground. Nobody panics. Someone patches a crack, someone kicks a loose chunk of dried mud back into place. Life goes on. But as the years pass, People change. Neighborhoods shift. Maybe a flood comes. Maybe a new temple is built somewhere else. Maybe the family moves away. And then the wall is left alone. Mud brick walls hate being alone. Without someone to patch them, clean them, and slap fresh plaster over their flaws, they start to unravel. Rainwater soaks into the bottom bricks. The sun bakes the top ones into brittle shells. Cracks stretch like lazy cats waking up from a nap. A wall that once stood proud begins to lean just a little, and then a little more. If you were to walk through one of these abandoned spots, you'd hear almost nothing. No hammering, no chatter, no clinking of clay bowls. Just the faint whisper of wind sliding through gaps in the bricks. The walls don't fall all at once. They melt back into the earth. One brick at a time. One small crumble after another. Here's something fascinating. Because Mesopotamian bricks were made of mud, ruins didn't stay ruiny for long. In some places, within a few decades of being abandoned, the once sturdy walls flattened into mounds of soft earth. The outlines of homes and streets were buried under wind-blown dust, as if the city simply sighed and lay down to sleep. To modern archaeologists, those soft mounds are gold mines. But to the ancient people passing by, they were just ghost neighborhoods. Sometimes these abandoned places got reused. If the bricks weren't too far gone, someone might collect them, reshape them, and build a new wall elsewhere. Recycling wasn't trendy, it was just practical. Why make new bricks when you can take old ones that are lying there, doing nothing? In other cases, the land itself got reused. Farmers plowed through old walls, turned the area into fields, and grew barley where houses once stood. The city didn't just disappear, it blended back into the world that made it. But some ruins were left untouched. Maybe people moved away for good. Maybe the water channels dried up. Maybe the place became more trouble than it was worth. And so, the walls stood quietly, eroding, turning into strange lumps on the landscape. Not spooky, just quiet. When wind and sand worked together, they could erase an entire block in a few years. Roofs collapsed first. Flat mud roofs weren't built to last without care. Then the upper walls followed. Eventually, only the bases remained, half buried and leaning like sleepy teeth in a tired jaw. Yes, ancient walls aged like teeth. Slowly, stubbornly, and a bit unevenly.
At night, these abandoned places must have looked eerie. No lamps, no cooking fires, no laughter. Just the moonlight spilling over broken walls. A stray animal wandering through might kick a loose brick, and the soft clunk would echo down the empty alleys. A forgotten city breathing in its sleep. But here's the oddly comforting part. This was expected. Mesopotamians knew their walls wouldn't last forever. Unlike stone temples and other civilizations, mud brick cities had a natural life cycle. Build, live, patch some more, and eventually, let go. Sometimes, a new city would rise on top of the old one. Workers would flatten the remaining walls, maybe even use the broken bricks as fill, and build fresh homes right above the old streets. Over centuries, this created tells, layered mounds made of one city stacked on top of another. A little like history piling up its laundry. Archaeologists today dig through those layers and find entire timelines of human life, one floor of bricks at a time. But imagine being there in the quiet moment before that. The first time a wall leans too far. The first roof that collapses with a dull thud. The first doorway buried by drifting dust. Nobody was watching. Nobody clapped. Nobody carved it into a tablet. It just happened. Quietly. Naturally. Like exhaling. And yet,
these abandoned walls weren't useless. Animals sometimes moved in, birds nesting in gaps, goats sheltering from the rain, snakes curling between the warm bricks. A wall that once held a family could end its days as a fancy goat shed. Life kept moving, even if the people had gone. Some ruins even became landmarks for travelers. A crumbling wall near a river might serve as a meeting point. Turn left at the old city, they'd say. Not because it was majestic, just because it was there. And that's the quiet kind of legacy mud brick walls left behind. Not monuments, not eternal stone, just shapes and whispers guiding people who came later. You could almost say Mesopotamian walls had two lives, one as proud homes, and another as tired, sun-baked ghosts in the wind. When rain finally soaked the last bricks and the earth swallowed them back, nothing dramatic happened. The city didn't explode or sink, it just became land again. Grains would grow where kitchens once were. A canal might curve over an old courtyard. Someone might walk across the spot centuries later and never know a whole world once stood beneath their feet. It's a little poetic, isn't it? The walls that came from the earth returned to it. Dust to dust, mud to mud. They didn't need to last forever. They just needed to last long enough to hold a life. And now, thousands of years later, those gentle mounds are still there. Archaeologists dig carefully, brush away the dust, and bring the city back to life, brick by brick, wall by wall, story by story. But the walls themselves, they don't complain. They've already done their job. They've already gone home. We've walked through it all now. The mixing, the shaping, the drying, the stacking, the cracks, the patches, the painted walls, the sleepy ruins. And yet, this isn't really the end. Because mud brick didn't just belong to the past. It lingered. It lasted. It refused to be forgotten. You might think, surely after centuries of people watching their walls melt in the rain, they'd move on to something fancier. Well, yes and no. Mud brick stayed around for thousands of years. And honestly, it makes perfect sense. First, let's state the obvious. Mud was everywhere. You didn't have to mine it, you didn't have to ship it across the desert, you just dug a little hole and boom, construction material. It was cheap, easy, and wonderfully low-tech. No giant quarries, no shouting foremen, no expensive stone, just earth, straw, water, and patience. It was basically the ancient equivalent of DIY home improvement. Mud bricks were also fast to make. A group of workers could shape hundreds of bricks in a single day. Sure, they had to wait for the sun to dry them, but Mesopotamia had no shortage of hot days. Stone construction might take months. Mud brick walls, you could put up a house before the harvest festival. And if your wall cracked later, well, you just slapped on more mud. But here's the quiet genius of it. Mud bricks fit the land. They kept homes cool during blistering summers and held warmth during cold nights. Thick walls breathed just enough to make life comfortable. No insulation panels, no air conditioning, no complicated engineering. Just clay, doing its thing. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. And when something works this well, people stick with it. Even as empires rose and fell, Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, Assyria, mud bricks stayed. Kings built grand palaces of baked brick and stone, but most people still lived in sun-dried mud houses. Why? Because palaces are expensive. Mud is not. Even parts of those royal buildings had mud brick cores hidden beneath more durable surfaces. A palace might have fancy facing bricks, but deep inside, it was still the same old mud holding everything together like a shy stagehand behind a fancy play. Temples and ziggurats, those massive, famous structures, were mud at their core too. The outer layers might shine with baked bricks, glazed tiles, or bitumen coating, but peel all that away and you'd find the heart of Mesopotamian architecture. Ordinary, humble mud stacked carefully. It's almost poetic. Even the grandest monuments were built on the same stuff as regular homes. And here's another thing. Mud bricks were recyclable before recycling was cool. When old buildings crumbled, people just scooped up the remains, added a little water, and made new bricks. No rubble to cart away, no waste, just a clean loop of earth going round and round. Honestly, if Mesopotamian brickmakers had a slogan, it might have been, "Why make new mud when you can reuse the old mud?" This practicality meant that brickmaking skills were passed down quietly through generations. You didn't need to be a master architect to make a brick. A child could learn to mix clay and straw. A teenager could press the molds. Adults could build the walls. The knowledge wasn't locked in temple archives. It lived in hands, in muscle memory, in the rhythm of everyday life. It wasn't a secret art. It was just what people did. Even when stone started appearing more often in construction, especially in richer regions, mud never really disappeared. In fact, in many parts of the world, it still hasn't. From rural villages in the Middle East to adobe houses in the Americas, from North Africa to Central Asia, people are still making bricks the same way Mesopotamians did thousands of years ago. Clay, straw, sun, time. That's it. Why? Because sometimes the simplest solution is also the smartest one. Stone cracks too, wood rots, steel rusts, but mud? Mud just goes home quietly when it's done. Of course, mud brick architecture had its limits. It wasn't great for giant domes or heavy arches. Rain was its natural enemy. But people learned to work around that. They built thick walls, sloped roofs, protective plaster, drainage channels. They didn't try to fight nature. They built with it. And that might be the most elegant part of all.
When archaeologists first started digging up Mesopotamian cities, they were amazed. Not by shimmering palaces or golden towers, most of those were long gone, but by the quiet footprints of mud, layer upon layer, brick upon brick. Whole cities that once pulsed with life, now resting as soft mounds under the sun. And yet, those humble bricks outlasted empires. Think about it. These weren't monuments built to be immortal. They weren't carved to impress future tourists. They were just homes, temples, granaries, streets. Ordinary buildings for ordinary people. But in their ordinariness, they became extraordinary. Because they tell us more about how people lived than any golden statue ever could. Mud bricks gave Mesopotamians shelter, warmth, and the shape of their cities. They watched empires rise, saw rivers shift, and quietly returned to the earth when their job was done. No drama, no fanfare, just mud doing its job. Maybe that's the real charm of this whole sleepy saga. While kings came and went, while gods changed names, while rivers flooded and dried, the humble brick stayed the same. Reliable, patient, a little boring, sure, but also kind of brilliant. Today, when we think of great ancient wonders, we picture pyramids and marble columns. But maybe the true backbone of civilization wasn't the fancy stuff at all. Maybe it was mud. Soft, squishy, ordinary mud, shaped by human hands into something strong enough to hold lives together. And so, our story of Mesopotamian brickmaking ends the same way their walls did. Quietly, warmly, with a little dust in the air and a sleepy hum in the background. Because some stories don't need fireworks. Some stories are made of earth. And they last, not because they're grand, but because they're real.